we're back for another week of our series called Contaminated, and I'm excited to spend it with you. I'm excited to spend time worshiping God with you, honoring Him, giving Him glory and exalting Him. So I hope we will prepare our hearts. I say it every week. I hope we come into this space and time being present, again, decluttering, and that's exactly kind of what we're talking about through this whole series, kind of decluttering ourselves from the noise and the influence and the strongholds and all of those things that this world that is broken and fallen away from God tends to want to bombard us with. So I pray that we would come into this space prepared and anticipating encountering Him. So as we do that, we're going to sing some songs, watch a video, and then spend some time in His Word. So I hope you're excited for that and you're anticipating doing that.
In the beginning, there was only darkness. But through Him, all things came to be, from the heavens above and on earth down below. He is the perfect image, the reflection of the unseen God, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. His hand produces displays of amazing power. His glory fills the heavens and earth with majestic light. For He is the one who conquered death. Sing praise to the giver of life, for Christ is the true source of hope for the world.
Like David, I want a faith like Paul. I want to sing like Silas, tearing down the prison walls. I want to face that fire, it won't burn me though. God's got my back, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. I want to walk like Moses, right through the waves. One day I'll see that promised land, no longer slaves. Though the fear is talking, though I can't take out my faith, I'm gonna praise, I'm gonna praise. I praise the mountain moving, body raising, breaker of chains. Gonna praise, I'm gonna praise. I praise the heaven seated, undefeated, highest of names. That's who I praise. Hey, that's who I praise. That's who I praise. I want a gift like Mary, I wanna break my veins. I wanna sleep like Daniel, even in a lion's cave. I'm gonna get that promise, just like Jericho. Yeah, I know what'll make it fall. I'm gonna praise, I'm gonna praise. I praise the mountain moving, body raising, breaker of chains. Gonna praise, I'm gonna praise. I praise the heaven seated, undefeated, highest of names. That's who I praise. Hey, I praise the God who's proven He can do impossible things. That's who I praise. Hey, that's who I praise. That's who I praise. He is the Lion of Judah. He is the Lamb that was slain, the only one who's worthy, worthy, worthy of all of His names. That's who I praise. He is the risen Messiah. He is the Ancient of Days, the only one who's worthy, worthy, worthy of all of His names. That's who I praise. So I'm gonna praise. I praise the mountain moving, body raising, breaker of chains. Gonna praise, I'm gonna praise. I praise the heaven seated, undefeated, highest of names. That's who I love like Jesus, that kind of grace. I want to live like I've got no more precious time to waste. I'm gonna give him glory with all my things. There's no greater, stronger, higher name. That's who I praise.
Well, we are still we just started this series called Contaminated. And as we talked about this last week, we talked about things that can contaminate us and just like our physical lives, things that can contaminate our physical lives that creates a negative impact upon our physical lives. The same is with our spiritual lives. And last week we looked at our thought processes, our thoughts. And if our thoughts become contaminated, then it affects the way we live out our spiritual lives. If you remember, Paul wrote in Romans 7, he said, there's things that I know what to do, but that's not what I do. I know the right things to do, but that's not what I do. And the things that are wrong that I don't want to do, those are the things that I do. And he's just like, what's ever going to become of this? Who's going to help me? And he's like, thanks to God, the Lord Jesus Christ. But Paul recognized that there was this war that going on inside of us, the spiritual side and the flesh side. And those two are constantly at war. And just like him, it's the same with you and I. We have this spiritual side to us, and we have this fleshly side to us. Now that I'm speaking to those that have received the free gift of grace and salvation. If that's the case, then we have a spiritual side, or we all have a spiritual side and a fleshly side in a sense. But those, if we are trying to live out this spiritual life, there is a war, there's a tension going on because the flesh doesn't want that. And so what can happen is our thoughts can become contaminated. And if our thoughts become contaminated, then it takes us down paths that we don't want to go, paths that's not healthy for us to go down to produce a healthy spiritual life of ours, right? We kind of give into the flesh or whatever that may be. So we have to be very careful about what we think about. And we're going to look at that passage of Scripture, Romans 12:2 here as well today. But last week we visited that passage of Scripture, and Paul talks about not to transform to and if I could just paraphrase a little bit, the hollow philosophies, the ways of the world, the thought processes of the world, the influences of the world. Don't conform. I think I said that. I might have said transform, but don't conform to that, but instead transform your thinking by having the renewing of your mind. And again, I paraphrased that a little bit, but it's that again, keeping guard of our thoughts. Are our thoughts pure? Are our thoughts noble? Are they based upon what is true? Are they based upon God's truth? Or are they based upon how the world is influencing us? And if that's the case, it will affect our spiritual lives because our minds have become contaminated. We need to guard against that. So today we're going to look at yet another topic that can contaminate us, that a possible but a possible source or whatever that can contaminate us and again affect our spiritual lives. And that's what we would call influences, okay? Things that influence us. If there are contaminated influences in our lives, it can again influence us in a very negative way and affect the way we again live out our spiritual lives. And so today, that's what we're going to take a look at. What are the things that influences us? Now, obviously, you could probably, jump to where we're going to go, and you would be right, because we're going to look at there are things that are contaminated that influences us, and if we don't guard that, it will impact us in a very negative way. It will have negative implications upon our spiritual walk. They can be things such as movies. I mean, how many movies, do we watch that are really not good influences, or TV shows, or things on the computer, or things that we look at, or things, when we look at Facebook and some social media and some of these other things. All of these things can be influences on us. They can influence us. And if we're not careful, if those things are contaminated, they can make us become desensitized. And after a while, what we knew was wrong and we felt what was wrong to begin with, and now we don't even really think about, because we have been influenced. Those contaminated influences has had an impact on us. And so we need to be very astute to that. very astute. Now, when we talk about the word contaminated, we've got two definitions that come from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Both articulate or define the word contaminated. The first one means soiled, stained, corrupted, or infected by contact or association. Soiled, stained, corrupted, or infected by contact or association. So you can see if the influence, there's something that's influencing us, if it's contaminated, it can soil us. It can stain us. It can corrupt us. It can infect us by our contact with it or our association with this particular influence, whatever it may be. Whatever it may be. The second definition is it's contaminated means it's something is made unfit for use by the introduction of unwholesome or undesirable elements. So again, if what influences us, if that particular influence is contaminated, it can make us unfit for use because we're being introduced by something that is unwholesome and has undesirable elements to it. And so that is the impact this contaminated influence could have on us. Whether it be social media, whether it be movies, whether it be music, whether it be books, whether it be the computer, things we look at, websites, whether it be places we visit, whether it be the groups of people that we're around, which next week we're going to talk about relationships, but it could be groups of people that we're around. It could be anything that has an influence, can have an influence on us. If that particular influence is contaminated, it can impact us and have major negative implications on us and how we live out our spiritual lives. Listen, Satan is very cunning. We know that. He is very cunning. He is very subtle in his attacks. It would be easy if we could identify Satan by someone walking around. I think visually what we envision is someone in a red suit with a long tail, with horns, carrying a pitchfork, and that's not the way he operates a lot. He works through very subtle ways. He's very cunning. He's very deceptive. He's very subtle the way he gets into our minds, the way he impacts us, the way he influences us. Extremely subtle. And he's looking to steal, he's looking to kill, and he's looking to destroy. He knows your major weakness. He knows what your lure is so that he can snag you and fish for you and catch you. He knows what mine is. He knows exactly what he's looking, he's very subtle, very cunning, to the point where a lot of times, again, if we're not extremely careful and we're not tuned in and we're not discerning, we can, our thoughts, like we talked about last week, can be contaminated, influenced by contaminated other things, and we can be influenced by contaminated influences. Now, certainly there are good influences out there, but just think about how he works and how he can use very subtle little things to get in and to contaminate us through a particular influence. I think it doesn't take much poison to just, to take us out, does it? A snake bite. Think about a snake bite. It doesn't take much venom that can take us out. Think about a spider bite. It doesn't take a lot of venom from a spider or a snake or whatever, some other poisonous creature to take us out. It doesn't take hardly anything. It doesn't take hardly anything to just take us down, to either poison us or to infect us, that can bring death, and it's the same it is with Satan. It doesn't take much. It's very subtle, very deceitful, very cunning, but these contaminated influences can literally take us down. Again, as I shared with you before, it can be music, it can be movies, it can be television, internet, social media, news, video games, friends. It can be a host of things that can have a negative influence. And it just takes a little bit to make us become desensitized, to again, just turn us, and to ultimately have incredible negative implications upon our spiritual walks. In Proverbs 25:26, the author Solomon says, "A righteous person who yields to the wicked is like a muddied spring or a polluted well. Now think about that for a second. It's a righteous person, a Christian, someone who is righteous, a Christian. If we yield to the wicked, to anything that is wicked, anything that is off, the poison of Satan, the acid of Satan, the venom of Satan, whatever it is, it can be the very slightest little bit. It can have this very negative implication to us, and we become muddied, spring, polluted water. Again, it goes back to that word contamination, right? Something that's been soiled, stained, corrupted, or infected by contact. We've been in contact or associated with something that's been contaminated. And it makes us muddy. It makes us like a muddy spring, like a spring of water that becomes extremely muddy, that there's no way you would want to drink it. You don't know what bacteria is in that, but there's no way you would want to drink it. Or a polluted well. Coming in contact with the wicked, such as being contaminated, we become unfit for the introduction by the introduction of the wicked, of something that's unwholesome or undesirable elements. And so we have to be extremely careful about the things we allow to influence us. Now, the question becomes, how do I know what influences are good and what ones are bad? And again, sometimes they're very obvious, right? I mean, sometimes they're glaringly obvious. We know that. We know exactly what those things are. And it's like, okay, I'm going to stay away from that thing. That is not a good influence upon my life, and I'm going to stay away from it. Other things can become so subtle and so cunning that it's hard to discern. To discern or kind of see that, hey, this is not a good influence in my life. This could take me down a direction or a path that I don't need to go. And it can be very subtle. It doesn't start off kind of like the frog in the kettle. You've heard about that, obviously. That old saying, the frog in the kettle. If you want to boil a frog, you don't put them in a boiling water real quick because it'll just jump out or whatever. But you start it off in slow, warm water and just gradually keep heating it up until you're boiling it and it doesn't even know. That's kind of the same, obviously the same thing with bad influences. If we're not careful, it's the glaring, the boiling water, that's the glaringly obvious one. I'm going to stay away from that one. But it's when we kind of get into that, into that tepid water, that warm water, it may feel a little bit good, but then it continues to heat up, and before we know, we're in the middle of something that is a very bad influence, and it was so subtle that we missed it. And this is where we can let our conscience be our guide, right? But here's the problem. Just like that frog in the kettle. If our conscience, the Bible talks about our conscience can become seared, right? Because we can kind of just say, well, this isn't that bad. And we can kind of take a step towards something that might not be good at all. But the way we kind of wade in the water, we kind of wade in gradually, and the next thing you know, we're in over our heads. And I think that's what that, having a seared conscience means. We don't start off that way. We know, we can discern, or we can see at times what is really bad, this is not a good influence. But sometimes we kind of edge in, we just take a little bite here and a little bite there, little this, little that, and the next thing you know, we're way down this trail. We're way down this muddy trail that we feel like we cannot come back up, right? And that's exactly what can happen. 1 Thessalonians, Paul writes to them, and he says in chapter 5, verses 21 and 22, he says, but test all things, and then hold on to what is good. Stay away from every kind of evil. So here's a couple of things we need to remember. Here's a couple of things we need to remember, okay? About this whole concept of bad influences. I just kind of jumped ahead a little bit here in a couple of points. My notes got kind of rattled, so I'm going to be repeating a couple of those things a little bit later. But here's a couple of things I want you to think about. Number one, a little bit of poison. We talked about this poison. It doesn't take much venom. A little bit of poison goes a long way. 1 Corinthians 5, chapter 5, verses 6 through 7, Paul talks about yeast. And he says, your boasting is not good. Don't you know that a little leaven leavens the whole batch of dough? Or yeast, right? Same thing. A little bit of yeast, it just takes a little bit to provide yeast to the whole batch of dough, leavens the whole batch of dough. And he says this, clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new unleavened batch, as indeed you are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Paul says it doesn't take that much. We need to be very careful because it doesn't take that much. It just takes a little bit to impact or to affect everything. It doesn't take hardly anything at all. Clean it out. Clean it out. Clean out the bad influences. Clean out the contaminated influences. Clean out the toxins within. Clean them out so that we can become new. So we become unleavened batch. And he says, as indeed we already are in Christ. Because Christ has been our sacrifice and we are new. But we need to be very careful because just a little bit of poison can go a long way. A little bit of venom can go a long way. The second thing you remember is this. Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't make it all right. The moral majority doesn't mean it makes it all right. I don't know how we get on these paths, but we think, well, just everyone else is doing it. Well, that doesn't mean that it's okay. I remember you've heard this, you've told your kids this, or you've been told this before, but you get in trouble and you say, well, so-and-so was doing it, and you get that, well, if so-and-so was going to jump off the bridge, would you do it too? I mean, that's like the day-old, cliche, right? But it's the same thing. Just because someone else is doing it doesn't mean it's right. And in Romans 12, chapter 12, verse 2, in the Message paraphrase, listen to how the author, Eugene Peterson, articulates this. He says this, do not become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Let me read that one more time. Do not become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you and develops a well-formed maturity in you. Just because the rest of the culture says that this is okay doesn't mean it's okay. Just because the rest of the culture is doing this, it doesn't mean that it's okay to do that. And as he articulates what Paul is saying, don't conform to your culture. Don't become well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it. That you fit into it without even thinking about it. Because that's so easy what can happen. We just kind of fit into it. We become so culturally adjusted that we just fit into it. This is what the culture says to do. So we're just going to fit right into it and we're going to adjust to it, right? And Paul is saying, don't do that. Don't do that because the culture brings you down. The culture brings you down. It's not going to build you up. It's going to bring you down. Satan is using it as a bad influence and he wants to bring you down. But instead, focus on what God wants. Transform your thinking to what the things of God, the desires of God, the wishes of God, God's standards, God's way. Because that way it's going to bring us life. That way it's going to bring the best out in us. If you remember watching, maybe some of you are old enough to have watched this, but if you remember back when the Hebrews, the children of Israel, came out, Moses led them out of Egypt. Remember that story? Where he led them out of Egypt, they crossed the Red Sea, and they come to the Promised Land. And that's where God was leading them. God was saying, this is where I'm taking you. I'm giving you this land. And it's going to be filled with milk and honey. It's going to be incredible. And so they send in 12 spies because they're going to go in and take this land. So they send in 12 spies to kind of check it out to see what it's like. So as they go in, they see individuals that are just giants in their eyes, right? But then again, they also see these incredible things. They bring back grapes that are so huge. They saw all kinds of stuff that was so much greater than the negative things. But what they did was they took their eyes off what God wanted. And as those 12 spies came back from that mission, 10 of them said, look, we can't go in there. Their cities are huge. There are people in there that we look like grasshoppers in the eyes of these individuals because they're so huge. And these 10 spies, 10 of them, their report came back and said, we shouldn't do this. 2 of them, if you remember, Joshua and Caleb said, no way. God is saying go in and take over this land. That is what we're supposed to do. But what happened was most of the people, the moral majority, spoke and they said, no, we can't go in. Why? Because they were filled full of fear. They had taken their eyes off God and God's direction and God's leading, and the moral majority said no. Caleb and Joshua said, we got to do this. But the moral majority said, no, we shouldn't do this, and they won out. And it was exactly the opposite of what God wanted for them. And in fact, the people that said no, they were not privileged to go into the land of Canaan later on. Only 2 of them and a new generation would go in and take over that land and be gifted that land that God had promised them. Joshua and Caleb, they're only 2 spies that were able to go in. The moral majority doesn't make it right. Okay? If everyone else is doing it, it doesn't make it right. Third thing to think about is this. Just because I can do this doesn't mean I should do it. And this is really hard, okay? The example goes, I can drive 120 miles an hour, right? I can do that. But is it wise? Should I do that? Probably not. That's probably not the best decision, is it? You know, I could do all kinds of things. I can make all kinds of decisions. I mean, I could do those. And some of them could be okay. Some of them could be right. Some of them might not be it might not be sin, right? But does it mean that I should do them? Just because I can do something doesn't necessarily mean that I should do it. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, he says, everything is permissible for me, but everything is not beneficial. Everything is permissible for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. Now, this is where we want to be very, very careful. This is why we be very, very careful, because this could become legalistic. Something that I might be able to do, you might not be able to do. Meaning that something that I might have freedom in doing, you may not have freedom in doing because of your walk with Christ. It's not a sin for either or, but here's the deal. I may be able to do something, but it may lead you astray. It may defeat you. It may hurt you, if that makes sense. I may have freedom to take a drink of alcohol, but for you, you can't. It's something that you shouldn't do, and it's something that you need to stay away from. But by me doing it with you can absolutely hurt you. So maybe it's not always beneficial for me to do what I'm free to do because it may hurt someone else. That's what Paul is saying. Everything is permissible for me, but everything is not beneficial. Yes, I can do this, but it's really not that beneficial for me. And everything is permissible for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. So hopefully you see that point, and hopefully see that it's not legalism. It's not something that I'm doing to earn favor with God. It's not something, and I can't press my ways upon you. If something doesn't bother me, if God hasn't convicted me about something that's not a sin, if He's not convicted me about it, but He has convicted you about it, then that's, again, you can't pass that on to me, and I can't pass on my convictions to you either when it comes to something that is not sin. Does that make sense? This isn't about legalism. I don't want to make this to sound about legalism, okay? So we need to be wise, and we need to be discerning, and we need to understand. For instance, maybe there are movies that I should not watch. I have freedom to watch that movie, but if I watch that movie, it takes my mind in a place that I shouldn't go. Now, should I tell you that you can't watch that movie because this takes my mind in a certain place and you shouldn't watch it either? You understand? That's what I'm trying to say. This is not legalism, but there's times where it's better for me I cannot impose my freedom on you, and vice versa. All right? Something may be okay for me to do, but it may not be beneficial. And I need to look at that through those lenses. Maybe there's some music that it's okay that I shouldn't listen to, but it's okay for you to listen to. Because if I listen to it, it takes me down a different path, and it just has a different impact on me, but it doesn't you. So I can't press that upon you. Hey, don't listen to that music because, hopefully this makes sense, because I don't want this to ever come off as legalistic, because it's not. It's just saying that there's a lot of things I can do, but a lot of things may not be beneficial. It may not serve me well, and it may not serve someone else well either. And that's where just because I can doesn't mean I necessarily should. So again, how do we know, and this is where I kind of jumped ahead, so knowing these things, how do we know what influences are good and which are bad? And again, like I said to you before, some of them are very obvious. Some of them are glaringly obvious. Some of them we know, this is not good. This is not good. I shouldn't do this whatsoever. But again, it may be dangerous for you, but not for me. But our conscience can be the guide. But the problem is, and I want to revisit this, sometimes our conscience becomes seared because I really want to do this. Even though I know it's not God-honoring, I really want to do this. And then maybe I will take those steps and do that. And after a while, my conscience can become seared, and we need to be very careful about that. And again, 1 Thessalonians 5:21-22, Paul says, test all things, hold on to what is good, but stay away from every kind of evil. So here's a couple things to think about. Number one, am I being entertained by sin? These are things that we can ask ourselves when it comes to discerning something, whether this is a good influence or not, whether this is a bad influence or not, whether, I have freedom to do this, but maybe it's not beneficial. Maybe we need to ask ourselves the question, am I being entertained by sin? Is this going to take me again in a direction that is not beneficial for me to go? And is it entertaining, am I beginning to entertain sin? Secondly, is this pleasing to God? Is it pleasing to God when I engage in this or engage in that or make this decision or that decision or allow this influence to have impact? Is it pleasing to God? And if it's not pleasing to God, obviously we don't do it. We stay away from it. And just as important, does this pull me away from Christ? Does this help me grow closer to Christ? Will this help me grow closer to Christ, or will it take me away from Christ? Will it move me a step away from Him? If it's going to take me closer, okay, then that's not a bad influence. If it's going to take me a step or two away from Christ, or it's not going to help me become closer to Christ, this is something that I shouldn't entertain. This is an influence that I shouldn't allow. I need to guard myself against. I want to just say, I've heard this story. I don't know if it's true or not, but back in the day, in the golf world, the word caddy, people who would carry clubs around for the professional golfers, they say that word came from when the queen or the king or whoever would where Ireland, Scotland, England, when they would go golfing, they would get these individuals, cadets. They were cadets. They would get these cadets to carry their bags, and that's where the word caddy came from. And as they would select these caddies, they would ask them, how close to this cliff would you go? How far close to this cliff would you go with the king or the queen or whatever? And the saying goes, or the story goes, that one caddy said, I wouldn't go anywhere near that cliff with the king or the king. I would stay as far away from it as I possibly could. And I think that is the thought we need to have as we think about influences. Is this a good influence or is it a bad influence? Let's not play the game of how close I can get to something. Let's look at it and stay as far away from it as we possibly can. I hope you think about what we talked about this week and even last week in this series called Contaminated. Guarding our thoughts, guarding our minds, transforming our minds, renewing our minds to God's truth, not conforming to this world. Looking at influences, examining, discerning them, and even understanding that if something, we have the freedom in something, but maybe it's not the most beneficial thing, that we will guard ourselves from that. That we will be so concerned about, am I entertaining sin? Is this pleasing to God? Is this going to take me a step away from Jesus? And becoming so passionate about guarding ourselves from not allowing any influence in our lives that would hurt our walk with Christ. I hope that's what you entertain this week. I hope it's what you pray about. I hope it's what you think about. And I hope that you'll see you back here next week as we continue on our series called Contaminated. Have a great week.
Here is where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. I will make room for is where I lay it down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. This is my surrender.